All right, so welcome to the second session of the workshop on the 7 future directions of artificial intelligence. It is with great honor today that we are having Dr. Debdoot Sheet from IIT Kharagpur University in India. And let me briefly introduce him. So he is a colleague of mine. So we worked on organizing the FAIR workshop in MICCAI this year. And it was a big hit, and I am very delighted to introduce him. And I'm sure this very short bio doesn't tell us everything about him. He's doing great work when it comes to AI affordability and medicine. So he is an assistant professor of electrical engineering with an associate appointment at the Center of Excellence in Artificial Intelligence at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. His research interests include medical imaging, machine learning, deep learning, multilinear tensor algebra engineering. And he is also the recipient of the IEEE Computer Society Richard E. Merwin Student Scholarship in 2012, the Fraunhofer Applications Award at the Indo-German Grand Science Slam in 2012, GE Edison Challenge 2013, a lot of awards, distinguished alumnus of IEM Kolkata in 2016. He is chartered engineer, senior member of IEEE, which is like, the Great Society of Engineers, member of MICCAI, life member of IUPRAI, if I'm pronouncing right, BMESI, and serves as regional editor of IEEE Pulse since 2014. So he is a local organizing chair of the 2022 IEEE International Symposium on Biomedical Imaging. So let's all welcome Professor Debdoot, and I'm gonna just, stop the screen sharing and here make you a co-host so you can start your presentation with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so I guess my screen is visible to all of you?
Yes, it is visible, and we can hear you very well too.
So thanks, Islam. It was a wonderful introduction, and thanks for having me over here. So yeah, I'm just going to keep it much more lower than trying to speak a lot on technical engineering stuff, which I generally otherwise do. But today I'm going to speak about what we do in this engineering, which is essentially going to transform how healthcare delivery can be enabled. And I have a specific case over here, which is essentially what we did in the times of COVID. It was a very small intervention, technically speaking. There was no great research which needed to be done over here. But then what it led to as a contribution was definitely something which cannot be taken for granted or cannot be left out. So it did speed up how a certain kind of medical knowledge can be delivered and made into a working standard for everyone to consume. So, I mean, when we got, say, stuck with this COVID, and that was around in December 2019, and the whole world was now starting to panic out. In India, we were sort of like in a better state because we were not affected anywhere in December, and things really did not start to get worse and make everybody worried until and unless it was about March of 2020. So around that time is when it was really scary because we shut down universities, offices, everything overnight. And beyond just shutting it down, we had real problems in terms of how are we going to mitigate and manage out about a disease for which neither are the symptoms known nor is a medicine available. We don't even know what is the total cure time and nothing of that. So essentially, this being a new disease, clinicians were practically posed with a major challenge of what is called as lack of evidence. So all of medical practice is basically relying on evidence-based medicine, and this is something where there was no evidence. So everything which we know about in modern medicine does not work over here because the starting point of that is evidence. So how do you really get to that point is where we pitched in our efforts as a community which delves in AI for healthcare. So in simple terms, what we wanted to do was something like this, that though RT-PCR tests or serological tests were what was getting recommended and is still recommended, but then the easiest of them was actually you can get imaging done. The only issue is that you don't always have access to X-rays everywhere. X-rays were not even a standard for lung diagnosis in the early days of COVID. It took much later on, and possibly like all of these lower and middle income countries coming down to take a lead in order to get a WHO standard approved that these chest X-rays actually come in as standards for diagnosis for COVID. Now the point was that CT is not always available, so somebody needs to find out some way of doing it out, and that's where it works out. Now, if we do with X-rays, that's going to be the easiest one. You directly look into your lungs if there is some sort of an infection, and you find it out and you do it. Great. So, and people like us as image analysts, our job becomes easy. So I can always come and say, hey, AI is going to really transform the world and make medicine delivery faster. What I just need to do is you give me a bunch of images, I will train a deep learning model on top of it, and then voila, comes out this piece of Python code or a PyTorch deployable, and then I give it to you, and then as if all the problem in the world is gone. And then suddenly one fine morning you will wake up and then thinking that, okay, yesterday night I have solved out the great COVID crisis, and from tomorrow there is no problem with diagnosing COVID. Well, I mean, in fact, I was also guilty of thinking it in that way when we started all of this activity around with the action group. And sooner or later, we realized that it was much far away from being true. So what we wanted is something like this, that you're given an image to this AI model, which is intelligent enough to actually come up with a very text-like description saying that what is there in that image. So it can read out something like this, that there is a coarsening of lung markings more evident in the lower fields, but no clear consolidation is seen. So this is an actual text which I just ripped off from a radiologist's annotation for this particular X-ray over here. And now if you look over here, the challenge is that you want your AI model to ingest an image, and out comes a text diagnosis, which is really trustable, interpretable, and usable in that particular scenario. Well, how do you really want to build it up is now the bigger challenge. So AI models reside essentially on consuming a lot of data. Now comes the bigger problem. So if I want to train this AI model over here, then my first problem is as to what kind of an image am I going to take as input. So that essentially is the modality of imaging. Now, most of the developed part of the world, China, US, Europe, everybody was using CTs. But then all of us know the stark reality of lower and middle income countries is that you don't have access to CT. It's not so simple. Plus on top of it, countries like India, which don't have access to CT, and then there is also a huge population which you will have to cater to over here. So what do you do? Now, what we have access to on the other side of it is tons of X-rays. So practically every single small hospital which caters to about a small village of 1,000 families will also have a X-ray unit over there in those hospitals. That's something which some revolutionary health ministry officials about a decade back implemented some plans that they really want to do that because they wanted to have a real-time check and control over tuberculosis, which otherwise is another bigger chest disease in India. And as a virtue of that, we are now left with a lot of X-ray machines practically available everywhere. The issue is that these are all analog X-rays. So what you get down is just a film. You don't have an image. And I have AI models which can just read JPEG files. They cannot read films over there. The other side of it is point of care ultrasound, which is at that particular point of time, it was really being heralded as the most revolutionary thing, which will help to understand what is going on inside the lungs. The only problem is that point of care ultrasound for lungs is not a modality which is so recognized by the American College of Radiology, and by virtue of which most of the developed part of the world doesn't really do point of care ultrasound for lungs. But then there are groups which were really working out on it. So the first major problem is like, which will be your modality, or which kind of an image are you going to really choose and work with? And that's going to impact a lot of things. So today, if you build up AI models which work only on CTs, then essentially you are forcing all hospitals to use only CT images or buy CT machines so that your AI can work over there. So, and think about it, in lower and middle income countries, you can buy basically 150 X-ray machines for the cost of a CT machine. It's as simple as that. So now you know how many hospitals you can equip, one versus the other. The next problem which comes out is that somebody needs to label these images. And this is where it was a bigger problem. So when we label all of these images, in case of image analysis, what you do is you have a very distinct definition. So this is my lungs. This is my different lobes of the lungs. This is where my heart is sitting. This is what a consolidation would look like. This is what a ground glass opacity is going to look like. You have these very strict definitions over there. And here, for the first time, when we were looking into COVID, we did not really know. We had no idea as to what constitutes a biomarker in order to identify COVID itself. And if you will following down any of these medical literatures in radiology journals or any of these clinical journals, during the period of COVID, so starting around in January of 2020, there were like tons of those reports which used to come out. So every week you would have about hundreds of reports coming out from Italy and from different hospitals in China, which would just be providing like what were the symptoms they had seen, which was common across the board of patients which they were looking into. So people were just publishing case reports over there, but then still it was very far away from being a simple checklist based on which you can say that this is present or this is absent. And that's essentially what we need in terms of our labels for training the AI models. The next problem which comes is samples. Now, this wasn't actually a problem because by the time we started all of this work in sort of like end of February, there were over 1 million confirmed cases of COVID across the world. And for most of them, there were CT and X-ray images available. And for some reason, people of our group were almost running a call center out of our lab in order to connect with different hospitals which were publishing out case reports. So what we did early on is like, we first and foremost, we reached out to ACR and asked them that, can you give us some sort of a license over all the COVID images which are published in your journals, and they agreed to give it to us. So that was a big treasure trove. So suddenly, like one fine morning, I'm sitting on top of 10,000 images of COVID cases, X-ray, CTs, ultrasound, everything over there. And then from there, we could isolate and find out a lot of other people who were just pushing out images on GitHub, on Google Sites, on Bitbucket, on Google Drives, and I don't know whatsoever places over there. And then just hoping that somebody would come up with some AI model or some sort of a biomarker in order to come to a conclusive diagnosis. We just took in all of them. So we had a good treasure trove over there. I don't think we had 1 million images, but definitely something in the order of about 10,000 images was what we had with us. The problem was that there was no radiology reporting and data system available for COVID at that point of time. So we did not know exactly what is a biomarker and whether it's present or absent, and how do you quantify that biomarker. This is what was completely absent. Now, that's where this whole challenge, which now look good, that I am sitting on top of 1 million images. So people who solve deep learning, we know that your ImageNet is basically 1 million images. So now you are sitting on top of a COVID-19 equivalent of an ImageNet data set. And now you can say that I will train my deep learning model, except for the fact that ImageNet is annotated and this is unannotated data. And on top of it, you don't even know what to annotate. That's a bigger problem. The reason it's not annotated is because we don't know what to annotate. Now here we came down to establish this pro bono initiative, and it's still live. You can just reach out on our GitHub page and look into what we had done, and then work it out. So now when we got together as a team of radiologists, physicians, and a lot of research scholars, NLP experts, computer engineers, software guys, everybody, and then with a lot of help which we got down from RSNA as well as from the Indian Radiological Association and a couple of hospitals, local hospitals to even hospitals way back in Italy. as well as we did collaborate a lot with the COVID-19 EU challenge in order to come up with this standard, because they were themselves struggling with the problem that though sitting on top of a treasure trove of data, they did not have annotations for the data. So together what we did was something like this. So the story goes, so first we need to understand the problem, and then I keep on telling you how the story went on, what we ended up doing in order to come up with a solution. So the problem is something like this. Say that there are two hospitals in two different cities. So I'm looking at hospital A, which has a certain number of beds available to them. And then let's look into what is the density of these cases happening. So on day one, you have one particular patient who is diagnosed with being COVID positive. And then you basically are able to admit that person into the hospital because that's equal to the number of beds they have. On the second day, you have another patient who gets affected and you are still admitting them. You keep on getting one patient affected every day, and then you reach up to this point where you would see that all of your hospital beds essentially get filled up. And then that's something like day 20. So this is again taken up from actual statistical data that from the day of your first discovery, you would need about 20 days in order to recover completely, and then you can be sent back home. So if I have a 20-bed hospital and there is one new patient who is getting affected every day, and if I am able to treat every single person and make them well within 20 days so that they go, then what will happen is on the 21st day, there would be one person who will recover. There would be one new person who comes up over there. And then this is what keeps on repeating over there. And then after a period of time, you would see that the recovery rate is higher than the number of people who are getting affected. So there is no person who is left out of the hospital in any way. So this is an ideal scenario, all of us, what we wish to achieve. And today the world basically sees this in terms of all of these waves and surges, what comes out. So you would see that there is a falling curve, and then so it's good that people are recovering at a faster rate. But then what I go on and say that people are not actually getting affected at a higher rate. It's not about the rate of recovery. Most likely your rate of recovery is pretty constant. But then the only thing which is happening is that the number of new cases is so low that you are seeing that there is a negative dip in the curve over there. Now, in a real world scenario, which is about what happens in hospital B, the problem is that you were getting these people affected up to 20 days. And then the issue is that you are not able to find out what is that optimal treatment plan which you need to give to this particular patient so that they can exit out of the hospital. As a result of which, now what happens is that your 20 beds are full. On the 21st day, you get one patient who is affected, but you are not able to hospitalize them. So this is that untreated patient who is out over there and now becomes a spreader. So this from one person, you have two people who are getting affected. From there, you have 4 people who are getting affected. And now you see that this untreated population, which is kept out of treatment of a hospital, is what is really scaling up. And that's leading to this surge. So the whole problem over here is that what hospital A was doing good is they figured out a way of how to manage this so that they can treat people in the optimal rate and then they can reduce this growth. Hospital B could not figure it out. Now, the only way which it can be there is that hospital B speaks with hospital A. Hospital A is willing to share all of that information with B, and then B can also start treating people. There is a catch over here. It's not so simple as simple as it looks like. So from a statistical point of view, it's like, okay, you guys go and speak with each other. Even policymakers do the same thing. They just go and say that speak with each other and your problem is solved. But what we really don't look into over here very carefully is that there is a demographic diversity which comes into play. So people will be of a different genetic makeup. They will be exposed to a different physical and physiological behavioral conditions. And these together are going to impact the recovery in a very significant way. So now let's look into what can be a possibility. Now say that both of these hospitals come together, they create a working group of physicians. And what these working group of physicians do is something like this. They want to create this evidence-based medicine. So what they do is the hospital A has some sort of a curve like this. So this essentially, this is your x-axis or the horizontal bars over there. They are showing some hypothetical score or a probability that treatment B is going to treatment B has a better outcome. This is what comes out over here as compared to treatment A or treatment C. Now, in case of hospital B, you see that treatment A has a better outcome compared to treatment B or treatment C. But there is a difference, and that prime difference is the patient demography. So the age group and the weight of people who are admitted to hospital A is very different from the group of people who are admitted to hospital B. Now, even if these two physician groups come together to discuss, how will they be ever able to find out what is that evidence over there? So what is the most likely symptom? Or do you think, or the other way around which we can have is that people can have a grouping created that if you are in so and so age group, of so and so gender, of this kind of a genetic makeup, of this kind of a pedigree, then and so weight, and so lifestyle conditions, then these kind of treatments will work for you. So there can be a different group or bucketing of these treatments which we can do over here. And that's essentially what is evidence-based medicine. So, well, in pure mathematical terms, or whatever you call in data sciences or whatsoever, what you are trying to do is you want to predict a posterior probability of a treatment for a certain patient group. This is the end point of it. So now that brings me to the point that there's this classical Bayes rule to the solution. So Bayes rule will state something like this, that you have your outcome, which is essentially your posterior probability of that treatment being successful, that is dependent on the likelihood of a symptom for a certain treatment, which is essentially your observation. So you walk into a clinic, a doctor makes a certain set of observations. So they are your set of symptoms, which is there. Now for a set of symptoms, they know what were the group of treatments for which these set of symptoms were working, and that's essentially your likelihood. You have a prior probability of a treatment being administered, and you also have an evidence about a symptom which is available. And all of this is pure probability over here, what we are speaking about. Now, what we observe is something like this, that over the first, say 3 days in case of hospital A, and then you took all of these counts into action, and then on the 4th day, you get a certain patient coming to hospital A based on whatever hospital A had learned on the first 3 days, they are going to administer a certain treatment. Now, what did they find out? They found out that all of their patients were in the age group of 20 to 40 and weight between 50 to 60 who were admitted in the first 3 days. And there were just 3 patients who were admitted. Now, on the 4th day, if you have a patient who comes down from such kind of a distribution where the age group is still the same, but this patient is more than 60 kilograms in weight, now what do you do? Because you don't have an evidence. Essentially, your symptom over there is going to be 0. Your prior probability may be a non-zero value, but definitely your likelihood is also a 0. So this becomes as a 0 divided by 0, or an unsolvable mathematical riddle at this point of time. Now, this is the point where we need to get all of these data together in one single place. But in order to get the data, you need to find out what is that data, what constitutes it. So in simple terms, I used to explain this in a class in a very simple way. So you walk into a restaurant and or not even a restaurant. Okay, so let's take this example. I think the same thing might hold for some places in Tunisia, but in India, it's much easier to give an example like this. So you buy certain vegetables from the market, and you may have goats and cows in your house. So there are some parts of it which you eat, and whatever you don't eat, your goats and cows are going to eat over there. So now something is of use for the other, and it's the same thing over here. So until and unless you know what is your food, you cannot take it from somebody else over there. So when we want these two hospitals to collaborate with each other, you need to find out like what is that important data which they need to share with each other. So that's where comes down the problem in order to be able to bridge this statistical sufficiency. So let's understand. So how are these symptoms and treatments really designed? So on the simplest of the way, when COVID came into market and we were just looking into 2 things. So is the person coughing, and do they have fever or not? So typically you would be coughing a lot and you would have a very high fever. So this was associated with early symptoms of COVID. And even today, when there is somebody who is unmasked and they have these kind of symptoms, people would just drag them on to do a COVID test in any of these health centers over there. Now, what I can do is I can count on my population of people who are coming down to my hospital as to who have fever and who are coughing or they are not coughing. And this helps me in creating something which is almost like a histogram. So we are just looking at a 2D histogram. Now, I can have certain comorbidities which are also critical. So whether the person has hypertensive disorder or not, do they have diabetes or they are non-diabetic? Then I can create a joint observation as a result of all of these 4 variables over here. So what I'm doing over here essentially is every single colored box over there is a representation as to whether the person has fever, is coughing, and is hypertensive or not, and is diabetic or not, and so on and so forth. You have all the combinations. So essentially there are 16 possible combinations which you can create out over here, and they are all yes no kind of a question. We are not asking anything more than that. Now comes the evidence part of it. So say that I have 4 different treatment plans which I'm creating, and these are created by using 2 different drugs and 2 different kind of devices in order to administer these drugs. So you can have oral administration, you can have a blood transfusion administration, any of these 2 kind of ways of admitting drugs, and there are 2 possible drugs. In fact, way back in March of 2020, this was the only possible option which was available. So now with all of these, what comes down is you have 16 and then you have another 4 possible combinations. So that's 16 into 4, which makes it 64 possible combinations which I need to understand. So my likelihood matrix over here is a 64 element matrix which I need to fill it up. Now let's get to the point of a single hospital. So my hospital A was getting 1 patient per day, which means they would need 64 days in order to be able to at least fill up all of these elements in this matrix. So if say they were getting a unique patient every day, they would need at least 64 days in order to fill up, which is more than 2 months. So typically, until and unless these people, these 2 hospitals are discussing amongst each other, there won't be a knowledge exchange, and there is no way we will be able to create our own evidences. So this is where the whole global community was actually sharing case reports so that they are able to exchange their data. The only downside is people were writing text statements over there. So they were full sentences. They were not checklists. They were not variables which I can just do a yes or a no kind of a thing. And the major part was we did not know what to have in that checklist. So now what can be a possibility is that if there are multiple hospitals, say I have 6 hospitals, and everybody is collecting this data on a common standardized format. And then you share all of this data together so that on the aggregate, you are able to see these kind of hotspots. So you have certain solid boxes. They are essentially where I'm saying that you have most of the data over there and the remaining things are sparse. Now, this is what is going to help you create your likelihood and from there, your evidence over there in order to give a certain kind of a treatment. Now, it takes ages to come up with all of this. If you're looking into malaria, if you're looking into, say, even for flu, it took ages in order to come down for it. In order to understand this for Ebola, it took real years. It took about 5 years in order to come up with all of this together. Now, and here we were expecting that scientific discovery is so profound in 2020, as if I got a virus and then the next day I have the medicine out over there. So this was a weird, like really wild assumption most of the people were having over there. But still we thought like, let's give it a shot on what we can do around it. So now here comes the point. Now there was a treasure trove where people were sharing all of this information, and that was through all of these case reports which were getting published. Now, most of these case reports were congruent with each other, except for that everybody said that, see, this is a new thing which we observed for the first time in our population and is out over there. If you end up reading about 100 of those case reports, you would realize that essentially everybody was just looking at a piece of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle together. So there's one of this famous story about a group of blind men touching an elephant and trying to describe an elephant. So this was that kind of so one man goes and touches the tail of the elephant and then says an elephant is like a rope. Another one goes and touches the feet of the elephant and then says that the elephant is like the trunk of a tree. Another goes and touches the trunk of an elephant and says that the elephant is like a pipe over there. So this is what they were. Somebody touches the ears of the elephant and says that the elephant is like a fan. Now, that's essentially what all of these case reports were publishing. And now what we wanted to do is, can we get the information from all of these 7 men who are speaking 7 different languages and still describing an elephant come down to a common format and then have a more or less a consolidated description. So people who do computer vision do understand the concept of point clouds. So point clouds are essentially you have certain point of information about a whole 3D structure available at a point of time, but never the complete 3D structure available. But there is some neighborhood information which you can synthesize and then come up with more or less an estimate of what the total 3D structure looks like. So we did that. And from there, we started getting into it. Now, the challenge over here was there were definitely contradictory findings. And then there were these problems that in terms of imaging modality. So the developed world was reporting everything on CT. The developing world was reporting things on X-rays, and the underdeveloped world was reporting more on point of care ultrasound. And then there wasn't a common standard format. So how did we go around with that? So what we did is we thought like, let's create a sheet which basically has these 3 components. One is you report out on the symptoms, another is you report out on the observations based on an image, and then you have a triaging pattern. So whatever you observed in an image, what can be the risk associated with that? Now, if you do that, then what you will be able to do is that given a bunch of these clinical observations and clinical note sheets or case reports which you have, which can be converted onto this kind of a checklist. Now, for any single person, any new patient who comes down over there, you just have a clickable checkbox which can give you some sort of an indicator that this person has COVID or does not have COVID. Next, you can extend this one even to treatment outcomes. So you are administering certain kind of medicines to them, and you want to see whether they are recovering or not. In fact, with this, you can also find out whether they are recovering or not to a certain extent. So what we ended up doing was something like this. We initially built up a platform. So what we asked people is that we created a data port, which is just going to ingest annotations, case reports, images, everything over there. So people were freely contributing, waiving off rights of reproduction and putting down annotations. People were freely actually annotating others' data as well under conditions of anonymity. Based on that, we built up 2 different things. One is we built up a COVID CT and COVID X-ray analysis AI engine based on neural networks. On the other side, we built up a reporting and data system. That's the standard COVID-19 labs. And once this was done, we went on to educate. We published all of these. So the reporting and data system today is available online. In fact, this is one of those most comprehensive systems which caters to CT, X-rays, and ultrasound all together in one single sheet. So you can use any of them, and there is a cross correlation which is drawn, which is not there in any of these reporting systems otherwise available. And then we started writing down papers. We had AI models which we created and released out as well. So in order to build that, we took a very stratified intervention over here. So we started with saying that we will start with a very low level intervention in AI, which will include simple mechanisms of search, sort, and retrieval. And all of these are going to essentially work on web-based services. Next is to go to a mid-level where you have all of these reports and text and data which comes down to us. We want to go from there in order to spot what is an important finding and then give out a final decision for that. And then was a high level thing where we said like we are going to relate images to text level findings and then find out like what is, so there were 2 questions. One is, what is a predominant biomarker? Another is, where are you looking at in order to spot a biomarker and what does the biomarker look like? So that's the educational part of it, which can be achieved with the high level intervention. So going with the simple first level part, which was the low level intervention, which we did, that's an example which I have over here. So what we did was something like this. Since we had this data port, which was built where people were putting in stuff, now we started creating this AI engine. So the idea was very simple. We ran a certain set of keywords. The keywords were as simple as COVID-19, X-ray, and COVID-19 CT or COVID-19 ultrasound is what we wrote down. We got on a bunch of case reports coming on Google Scholar. Now, all of these are, I mean, today you have everything which is digitized, so there is no major problem. So on these digital contents, you basically needed to run a variancy spotting, which finds out, okay, these are the places where you have images, these are captions associated with images, and now you split them. Now, once we did that, we aligned all of these captions with common data elements, which is a medical dictionary by RSNA and ACR. Now, there were a bunch of words which we knew. There were a bunch of words which we did not know earlier. So some things like ground glass opacity wasn't something which was present before this one. So we took all of those, we ran it through some sort of a tokenization algorithm over here, then ran it through clustering. We just saw like how frequently were they coming across multiple case reports over there. And that created a bunch of keywords which we had. And based on that, we went out, used that reporting card with radiologists to report, and then did a revision on top of it. Now, once all of this was done, we came up with a sheet which looks like this. So it's just a simple plain checklist. Now, it bears a very close resemblance with what today you have from RSNA. The only difference is that it took us less than 30 days in order to come up with this one. It took RSNA more than 9 months in order to come up with this because RSNA still does it the old-fashioned way of getting human radiologists sitting in a working group and discussing and debating on what they had observed. And then there are all human issues of personal nature which also creep in, which delays the process. But it was interesting to see that an AI discovered reporting sheet has a very close resemblance with a human discovered reporting sheet itself. So finally, this is where I will come to an end. It took us about, say, 40,000 years to come out of that cave of the hiding within the cave from the darkness. But then it took us barely 3 months of COVID-19, which sent us back into our caves again. And honestly speaking, today we need to look into it, that how can a lot of technology really handhold with human civilization and work together instead of competing with each other. We really need to understand what is the complementary expertise and power which we have amongst each other in order to drive us to a modern world. At least we have an example. So with that, I would conclude on a positive note, and I'm open to taking up questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for this inspiring and massive work, Debdoot. So I would like first to congratulate you on all of this. So transforming, you mentioned 30 days of work, 9 months of work into 30 days just to create this report by using AI. Instead of trying to get people together to agree on things and negotiate things, you're just shoving all of these multimodal data sets into this AI system, and it's giving you the template, the report template that you want. So there are lots of challenges that you talked about, which is the first one. I might start with the questions, and then if you guys have any questions, please, I'll just communicate it. So the first question, when it comes to knowledge transfer between hospitals. So you talked about the personalized medicine, group-based treatment, because when the demographics change, when the genetic makeup changes, you might not have, you might not administer the same treatment. So whatever works here and gives you good results and good prognosis might not work in a different hospital. So how do you see this, like basically we live in a global world, right? Everything is globalized. We can easily share data, relatively speaking. Of course, there is like data privacy and all of that. But you mentioned a little bit about how can we solve this problem in your talk, but how do you see like maybe 5 years from now, how can we come together into data sharing and transferring these local information, these groups, how can we cover more variability in the patients and the diseases, and maybe also rare diseases or maybe new diseases that are coming and we don't know anything about it. So we need to come together to understand and debunk, the biomarkers of, like, for COVID-19 that you mentioned. So what are your thoughts on that into the future?
So I believe we are already sharing most of this data because clinicians are at least publishing case reports, which is a big thing. So we might have all of these reservations in terms of sharing the raw data of a patient, and that still will be there. I mean, in fact, I might not be comfortable sharing my own health data with anybody out over there. So we might go back and forth on this debate, but it does not help. But knowledge sharing has always been there and will still be there. What we really need to find out is that instead of somebody trying to be that, say, a super collective of all the knowledges, and this would be something which I generally speak out to all the publication houses, that instead of one of these publication houses becoming the greatest and the best of the journals and publishers for medical knowledge. It's better that everybody publishes and you guys come on to some common format of how to exchange your information and data. I believe that the whole world of library sciences has come up to a point where today there is much seamless access of information across each other. With all of the digital libraries coming on, it's becoming more and more easier. But where we really need to work on today is I'm not seeing any way in the near future that AI is going to completely replace clinical medicine or clinical practice with human beings in any way. What I'm looking down is that I want a human being to be able to get access to information at the fastest possible. Mm-hmm. So in the future, at some point of time, can we develop something similar to an image, a Google image search? So today, if I look into the image of a new kind of flower, which I don't know, what I can do is I just click a picture, I upload it on Google image search. So it just does a search by image, returns me a set of images of similar looking flowers, and then I can click on any of them and read the description and understand. This is essentially what we want in medicine today. So where we really want to go down is, one is knowledge sharing, but none of these AI models can be built on pure human understanding of it, because we are still touching only a part of the elephant. None of us have touched the elephant completely, and the elephant is so big, we might never be able to do that. What we need to come up with, can there be at least a common language which we speak, a common way of getting this information to each other? I'm not even advocating saying that all of us should start speaking English or French or I don't know, whatsoever becomes the global dominant language. No, my point over here is we really need to now being multilingual. So while we speak at least a common scientific language, let us also be speaking a common AI and data sciences language together. And this is where you will see this transformation come up. So once clinicians also start noting numbers, so I got down 7 patients who had more than 102 degree Fahrenheit of fever. That's where the transformative change will come. Instead of just saying that I got a lot of patients who had 102. Now, a lot for a clinician at my place might be hundreds of people who came down to his clinic. For somebody in remote Australia, maybe 2 people who came down to their clinic.
Mm-hmm. Great. So absolutely, I totally agree. So basically, yeah. So the biggest challenge you mentioned in the knowledge transfer and sharing all of this, and speaking the same language, like we come to a unification where we're using templates, reports across hospitals, across countries, and we globalize AI, technology, and medicine, healthcare. Then we can solve global crises together as COVID when we have something like that. But one last question before we go forward. So what you mentioned in the beginning about when we have data without any evidence, and that is something very a bit scary, like when you have, for example, a new disease appearing and you don't know what to do. So do you foresee how technology and AI, with the past experiences that we had with pandemics and data without evidence, and then we build evidence over time, when we have a new data without evidence, how can we proceed, or maybe how can we tackle that problem? Maybe like you mentioned, that if we unify, that would make things easier, definitely, to build evidence, right? So
I believe that for COVID-19, this is what was the starting point. So we relied on a lot of historical evidence from SARS, which was in China a decade earlier, and the MERS, which was in Middle East about 5 years earlier. So the genetic signatures, there were certain spike proteins which were similar in case of COVID with what was there for SARS and for MERS. And in fact, in the early days, the first few unfortunate people who were given out just medicines for trial, they were actually not given blindly. So they were given medicines which had acted as suppressors of those spike proteins in case of SARS and MERS. And based on that, now they could. So what happens is you have a bunch of spike proteins over here. Now I'm trying to suppress certain molecules. Now I know what are those characteristic molecules which are very characteristic of COVID-19. And then I can go and actually, so there was a lot of this in the whole field of in silico discovery for pharmacy. People use these learning-based models and computational chemistry models in order to come up with discovering molecules. In fact, that is what was done. We today have 2 vaccine candidates which were also in silico discovered. and brought out to the manufacturing phase. So I strongly believe that it's no more a distant future, but we are somewhat which in that world which is using AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So one last question, maybe before we wrap up this session. Do you guys have any questions here? Okay, so I might ask the last one. So what is the biggest challenge that you see to the knowledge transfer that you mentioned, and like, you know, building these templates, like these unified templates across at a global scale? What is the biggest challenge to making that happen, right? Yeah, you're smiling. I know there are challenges.
Yes, the biggest challenge is we as human beings. We do not want to share our data. I mean, honestly speaking, I don't want to speak out. I don't want to. So if I have a problem, I should go out and speak out the problem. That's where the solution to the problem comes from. So people just go around blaming that there are government regulations, blah, 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 everything. But let's be very honest and say that in 2021, the government essentially is just an official documentary reflection of the citizens of that country, nothing beyond it. So if we really wish to have it, we can always do it.
Absolutely. I will applaud you for that, because I definitely and absolutely 100% agree.
At least I sit in a country which really released out a lot of data. I mean, we used to run, we still have one of our servers which is predicting when is the next wave coming down at different places. And the only way we are able to predict out on that wave is because we pull in all the real-time data about COVID stats from a government data server. And they allow us to do that. And it's free for anybody who registered and gets it. So at least coming from a country which has a lot of digitized data, which is made openly available for citizens to do any discovery they wish to do, it really facilitates. So today, I mean, the best way is we as citizens need to agree that we share our data. And in fact, we do it. So we have a common unified citizenship registry system, which is called as Aadhaar. Based on that, what happens is every single individual in India is given a 16-digit unique identification number. And you can basically code that number and then everything gets done. So if I'm vaccinated, I just need to code that number. I just need to give, like, if you want to check my vaccination status, it's also very simple. You just need to know that 16-digit number for me. It's going to pull out my complete vaccination history over there.
Wonderful. So
these are kind of things which you need to do, and it's more than government, it's people's initiative. If the people of the country really want it, you can definitely do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Debdoot. Thank you for all the sharing. This was very inspiring. And definitely, guys, make sure you mark this. There's like, you know, COVID-19 action-radiology.github.io. So feel free to look. There are lots of data and reports, and I'm sure you can benefit from that. Thank you so much for joining us today. And have a great day. And hopefully we'll have you again in future workshops. Thanks, Debdoot. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.